The
players.
Yeah, so the injury thing has to be just an organizational, like, hey, we just have guys play through injuries, right? Like Kyle Walker wasn't allowed to swing for a month and a half last year because his back was so messed up, but they let him and then they let him keep pitching, and then he just sucked. Yep. What is going on, guys? So with this being the playoffs, we've got our content structured a little bit differently. We're trying something new today. So the slate started at 1. I did that show. Now we're also doing a show kind of in the middle of the slate. We're going to be talking about the later 2 games that are going to be happening, but then also we could reflect a little bit on the early games and then maybe also make some kind of swaps based on that. Maybe if you have lineups that were really chalky that are drawing dead or something, we could kind of walk through how to recover some entry fees. So hopefully you guys enjoy this and a lot of people watch, and then we can keep doing something like this, or maybe the NBA won't even have slate scheduled exactly like this again. It won't matter. But Matt, how are you feeling so far about this slate and what happened in the first, let's say, game and a half so far?
Yeah, I would say the first game went pretty much to schedule. Donovan Mitchell, Bojan Bogdanovic were really good for Utah. The Mavericks, not so much like gaudy fantasy numbers, but you got some good value from Spencer Dinwiddie. Jalen Brunson had a solid game. So I don't think that there's a ton to be gained there, like that game kind of went how everyone was expecting. And then this second game is off to a pretty predictable start as well, right? Like it had the highest total on the slate. This was the game that everybody was expecting to be the highest scoring of the day. And we've got 127 points here at halftime. Jaws looked great. Anthony Edwards has played well. Towns, nice bounce back for him after that play-in debacle. So I think there's really not a ton to be taken away at this point, right? I guess Malik Beasley, has provided some scoring off the bench for the Timberwolves that might have been a bit unexpected in that second game so far. But other than that, I don't think there's been a lot of huge surprises.
So I'll ask this: which players do you think we saw from the first game that are most likely to be optimal in the optimal lineup today? Both FanDuel and DraftKings, it's going to be a little bit different across the 2 sides just because the pricing was so different. But Which players do you think we saw from the Utah-Dallas game that are most likely to end up in an optimal lineup tonight? If any, if you say nobody, that's fair as well.
Yeah, I would say Bogdanovic is more than likely going to end up optimal. I mean, he basically 8x'd his salary. And then I would say after that, it's going to be Dinwiddie, who was really, really cheap on DraftKings. He was 6,300 on DraftKings, and he put up 39 DraftKings points. So I would say those 2 guys are the guys that I would expect to be most optimal at the end of the evening.
FanDuel specific, Dorian Finney-Smith is a potential one because he racked up. He was having a shitty game, and then all of a sudden he got like a steal and 2 blocks in the final minute of the game. And then because of the way the scoring works on FanDuel, he ended up finishing with 30 and a half FanDuel points at 4,800. I think there's a pretty good chance that DFS ends up being optimal there. Based on what we've seen from Morant so far, I think it's pretty inevitable that he ends up being optimal on FanDuel as well. 8,800 with 34 fantasy points in the first half. And then for DraftKings, I know he didn't blow the doors off anybody, but Maxi Kleber scored 16 fantasy points at nearly min price. He's really popular. If we have, Jokic, Embiid, guys like that go off, I think there's a decent chance that Maxi ends up being in the optimal lineup just because he was so cheap, and there aren't that many cheap guys that I think are that likely to go off today. I know Beasley's off to a good start, but chances are we're going to need multiple of these cheap guys if we're going to see Morant, Embiid, Jokic be guys that score like 60 to 70 fantasy points. So I think Kleber is somewhat likely to be in the optimal lineup, even if he wasn't necessarily crushing just because he's cheap and he put up 16 fantasy points.
Yeah, I do think there are some other cheap plays that are to come in this next 2 games that could supplant him. Kevon Looney is 3,400 on DraftKings. You've got Jeff Green is 3,600. there are a couple guys in that 4K type range that I think could potentially supplant him. But yeah, you're right. If it ends up being a stars and scrubs type slate, 16 from Kleber might be okay. Might be enough.
Yeah, especially, and then also we're talking about just beyond the Jokic, Embiid, Harden, or whatever. I mean, like you said, Cat right around 30 fantasy points at halftime. Morant, we talked about him, 33 on both sides at halftime. So there's going to be a lot of stars that go off in these playoffs. Like there's going to happen when these star players are playing 40 plus minutes. And it's also really hard to find value on these slates because teams don't generally rest players unless it's something like Luka, who actually legitimately gets hurt. I want to ask you about Looney, because we had a couple of people already have asked about him in the YouTube chat. And then also, he's somebody who's making in some of the lineups that I've built so far for this 2-game slate, but then also for the full slate, I have some exposure to him for some of the same reason I have exposure to Kleber. I didn't have a crazy high projection for Maxey. I had him projected for 21 fantasy points. That still ended up making it into a lot of my lineups just based on the outlook of this slate and the pricing. But I kind of feel the same about Looney. I have him projected for under 20 fantasy points, but it almost doesn't matter because I need those salary savings to get up to the guys like Jokic and Embiid. But what is your expectation for playing time for Looney? Because it has been all over the place lately.
Yeah, I would say about 18 to 20 minutes. And he is right around a fantasy point per minute type of guy. He's been a bit worse than that over the past month, but historically, and for the course of the full season, he's been right around 1 fantasy point per minute. So I think, projecting him for somewhere from like 18 to 20 fantasy points is pretty reasonable. And as you mentioned earlier, there's just not a lot of value that you can feel comfortable about here, right? Just looking at our projections for these final 2 games, the 2 best guys from a value perspective are Jokic and Embiid, right? And then there's only Looney is the only guy right now in the top 9 from a value perspective who is priced below 5,500. So that's just it. He's not the most appealing play, but you kind of need somebody like that today. And there's really not a lot of other options at 3,400.
Yeah, the only other one. So I guess we could just kind of talk value options. It's a 2-game slate. It's kind of hard to go game by game, but let's walk through the different value options we have available to us on DraftKings for the final 2 games. And then we could talk about them on FanDuel as well. FanDuel is running much smaller contests for this slate than DraftKings is. DraftKings ran $150,000 prize pool with $50K to first place. FanDuel was running like a $20,000 prize pool with $5K to first place. So a lot more people are going to be playing that DK slate than the FanDuel slate, just based on the amount of entries. If people have FanDuel specific questions, throw those into the YouTube chat also, or if anything that comes to late swap. But a couple of guys that I think we should highlight here. First for me, Matisse Thybulle. And I know that Mike's ears are going to perk up whenever he hears us mention a Philadelphia 76ers guy here. But Thybulle, number one, I think he's going to be important in the series against Toronto. And that's also why it's such a big loss that he can't play. Games. Yeah, he can't play any of the road games. I think that's going to be a really big issue for the Philadelphia 76ers, because I think he's so important to guard guys like Pascal Siakam, Scotty Barnes, OG Anunoby. I think they need his size and length and his defensive capabilities. So I look at him at 3,400 as a guy that has a pretty good chance to play north of 30 minutes. I know he's not the greatest fantasy producer in the world, but once again, same as the guys like the Kleber, Kevon Looney. It's just we need cheap guys that are going to play minutes. He fits the bill for me. So he's a contrarian play I liked a lot on the main slate. What do you make of Thybulle first for this game, and then just the series in general?
Yeah, I kind of go back and forth on the Matisse Thybulle versus Danny Green minutes, right? I think if one of those 2 guys can grab the majority of the minutes, they're going to have value at their price tags. But I think the most likely outcome is probably a pretty close to a 50-50 split. Danny Green has kind of been playing well recently. He's got, 34 plus DraftKings points in 2 of his last 3. His minutes have been up in that stretch. And his playoff resume is solid for what that's worth. He's not the same player clearly that he was in his prime, but the guy has a reputation for being a big shot maker in the postseason. And I think that kind of stuff matters to coaches. I think Doc Rivers, that could be an appealing trait to him. For a team that kind of lacks perimeter shooting, right? James Harden is having a career worst season from behind the 3-point line. And so Joel Embiid, he can knock down threes, but that's a waste of his skill set. You don't really want him out there. And we know that Danny Green is a better perimeter shooter than Matisse Thybulle. So if we're prioritizing space, I think Danny Green is the better fit. If they want to try and turn this into a slog, a grinded out series, then Thybulle would be the better fit. I'm personally leaning Green over Thybulle for the time being, but I like the logic behind both plays is the same.
We don't have the starting lineup yet for the Philadelphia 76ers. I am assuming Thybulle starts. Are you assuming Danny Green starts over Thybulle, or is this just a thing like you think kind of regardless of who starts, Green gets more of the playing time?
The starting lineup will be important. I kind of have Danny Green penciled in as the starter at the moment. As we've talked about in the past, we know how terrible I am at this game. So it probably means Matisse Thybulle starts, but I just think the postseason experience is going to be a thing.
Yeah, and then we have a question from Joe Ducks and Raiders in the YouTube chat. And I think this is a pertinent point where he says that he would think Thybulle is a better play on FanDuel because of his defense and steals. In general, yes, 100%. Here's the difference, though. We are hurting for value on DraftKings. FanDuel, the pricing is so soft and crappy for this playoff slate that it doesn't really matter. Like Scotty Barnes is was it 5,500 on FanDuel?
Yeah.
So you just look at prices like that. You have 55 small forward, power forward eligibility. You just don't need the salary savings there. Like for the main slate, it was easy. You just play, like get a lot of exposure to guys like Dylan Brooks, Scotty Barnes, and just the lineups kind of came together in a way where you didn't need these cheap guys. So that's why, to me, that Thybulle is less of a priority on FanDuel. I understand entirely. The scoring for FanDuel rules much more favorable for Thybulle's gameplay than it is on DK. But at the same time, Thybulle's 4,000. You could get Scotty Barnes for 1,500 more, and he's eligible at other positions. So I find Thybulle to be a little bit unnecessary. Did you build lineups for FanDuel and DraftKings, or just one or the other?
I'm playing on DraftKings today, but I did build some FanDuel lineups just to have the exposure.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm playing on both sites, but much more on FanDuel today than I was on DraftKings for the main slate, just for reference for the people watching. But that was the reason that I just didn't think Thybulle's all that pertinent. Even my build that I have right now for the 2-game slate, I get to 14% of Thybulle. Low priority play for me. Let's see if we had any other questions here. While related to, once again, this Green and Thybulle conversation we're having, Graham Byrne is saying, would you play Green and Thybulle? So assuming, would you have it in the same lineup? That is a no for me. If you're hand building and you're trying to choose, one or the other, it's if you're playing both, it's such a negative correlation there because there are guys whose minutes are secure. Joel Embiid's minutes not going anywhere. James Harden.
The other 4 guys.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So you get to a point then where what happens if Thybulle plays well? Danny Green gets less minutes. What happens if Danny Green comes out and makes a few threes in a row? Well, then Thybulle gets less minutes. So it's hard for me to think that both of them have upside, especially because both of them are relatively crappy fantasy producers. We're just trying to find out, can we get like 20 fantasy points out of one of these guys that lets us spend up for some studs? So I wouldn't play Thybulle and Danny Green in the same lineup. What's your take on that?
Completely agree.
Yeah, so we are on the same page there. Did we have any other questions on this? No, not really. It looks like we've covered people's thoughts on this particular one. Are there any other value plays from the last 2 games that are standing out to you at all? Anybody who's sub 4K we could also consider?
Yeah, I think we have to talk about the Denver Nuggets. They're going to provide some value. I mean, Austin Rivers right now, he's priced at the exact minimum, 3K on DraftKings. We have him projected for 50% ownership on this 2-game slate. I imagine that that's partly just because people want to get both Embiid and Jokic into their lineups, which I can certainly get behind that strategy. But Austin Rivers just doesn't do it for me. I know that Facundo Campazzo is out, but I still think that puts him behind Bones, behind Monty Morris on the pecking order. I'd rather play Jeff Green at 3,600. I think the extra $600 there are well spent. And then if you wanted to get a little bit more contrarian with the Nuggets, I think you could play JaMychal Green at 3,300. So that's kind of how I'm approaching that situation. I'll be underweight on Rivers for sure at 50%. I'll be probably in line with Jeff Green, who we have projected for around 50%. And I'll be overweight on JaMychal Green.
All right, let me see what I have from these Denver guys. I am well underweight to the field on Austin Rivers. And if you're asking me to identify who are the best min price plays on DraftKings, the flat 3 came in. Rivers has to be in the conversation because there are not that many guys that are viable. But with that said, he doesn't warrant. There's never going to be a slate really where Austin Rivers warrants 50% ownership, even on a 2-gamer. I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense. So in the build I have him closer to 20%. As for the other guys, JaMychal Green, I don't really get that much interest in him. Jeff Green, I'm also underweight to Jeff Green here at 3,600, where he's also projected for 50% ownership. And that's a lot of ownership going to Austin Rivers and Jeff Green, 50% each. So, just doing some quick math there. You got like a quarter of the field is going to be playing lineups with Austin Rivers and Jeff Green together. The majority of the field is going to have one or the other in lineups. I think that Jeff Green is a little bit over on. I know you said you like him and prefer him to Austin Rivers, which I think is all well and good, but do you think he warrants 50% ownership?
My problem is we can't hate all these guys, right? Like you have to have some exposure to some of these players, right? We can't say like, because Kevon Looney is also projected for around 50%. And you, in a vacuum, you might look at all 3 of those guys and say, man, there's no reason any of those guys should carry that much ownership, but you probably need to play one of them unless you're really high on Matisse Thybulle or Danny Green.
So for me, I would rather roster Looney and Thybulle than I would roster Rivers and Jeff Green. I have Looney projected the highest of that group. And then I think Thybulle is kind of similar to the other guys, but he just has less ownership.
Right. Okay. I mean, that's fair. I'm fair with that. Again, for me, the big one is Austin Rivers. He's where I'm kind of going to be underweight on. And, if you want to, there are some creative ways that you can incorporate some min price guys. But like you said, I think that you probably don't want to go too crazy. Like JaMychal Green, I have about 10% JaMychal Green. The field is at about 3%. I have about 10% Gary Payton Jr. at 3,500. The field is at around 3%. So like, to me, there's just not that many guys you can roll the dice with from a value perspective.
Yeah. And that's also the reason why. So once again, Joe Ducks and Raiders followed up in the YouTube chat. He said, why would anybody play Austin Rivers in a game where he's facing the Warriors defense? Because we're talking about a 2-game slate. He's going to get minutes. Campazzo's out. By the way, I don't, relative to ownership, I don't think Rivers is a good play for this slate, but I'm just kind of defend why people end up getting to him. He's going to play minutes. He's the flat min, and people want to roster Jokic and Embiid for a good reason. You have to save that salary somewhere, and Rivers is cheap and is going to get minutes. So that's the reason why people are getting there. We have a question here from Kevin Foley. Will Thaddeus Young see the floor at all? He's asking more for Showdown purposes. So it's a good thing you qualified that by saying it's for Showdown, because Showdown is inherently going to be much different than playing the 2 or the 4-game slate. As for Thad Young, he might be in the rotation. I'm not totally convinced he will be, though.
Yeah, we have him projected for 1.5 minutes at the moment, which kind of says he's not going to be in the rotation. So,
yeah, and if you look at the rotation down the stretch of the season, he was involved. He wasn't playing big minutes, but there was also a lot of games towards the end of the year where guys were out. If you want to take a flyer on Thad Young, I guess. I think, though, I don't think he's guaranteed to be in the lineup. If that's what you're asking, is he for sure going to be in the rotation? He's not for sure in the rotation.
Yeah, Nick Nurse all year has played his top guys just huge minutes, and I don't see why that changes, right? You can pretty much pencil Siakam, Trent, and Van Vliet in for about 40 apiece. And then I think Anunoby and Barnes are 36 apiece easy. It just doesn't leave that much for the rest of the team.
Yeah, and then something else also with Toronto is keep in mind how many games they had guys banged up towards the tail end of the season where it was like, hey, Fred VanVleet is resting. OG Anunoby had the broken finger, if I remember correctly. Gary Trent missed a couple games here and there. So there was time for other players to step up and get extended minutes. Nick Nurse is going to give zero shits now that we're in the playoffs. These guys, I mean, these guys are going to like, what is, I think this is a fun kind of way to look at the Raptors rotation. What is the most amount of minutes any player on the team will play, and how many will it be tonight?
I think Pascal Siakam plays 42 minutes.
I'm going to say 44 for Siakam. I think he just runs me into the, I mean, I'm just doing it to come over the top of you. But okay. I think 42 is probably a reasonable way to look at it. What are some of the minutes for Siakam in games that were more important? Like, what about that Cleveland game? Remember they played Cleveland. That was a game that was really high leverage and mattered for playoff seeding. Oh, we got in foul trouble, so that's not going to be a good indication because he hooked up 5 personal fouls.
He played over 43 against the Heat. He played 42 and a half against the Magic. I mean, 40 is basically the guy's floor. So
here down the stretch of the season, these were the minutes in the final games that Siakam played. And some of these games were not that important. Houston Rockets, 40 minutes. 76ers, 37. By the way, the Rockets game, he also got into foul trouble, and he played 40. Atlanta Hawks, 40 minutes. Miami Heat, 43. Against the Magic, also 43. Timberwolves, 40. The Celtics, that was a double overtime game, 47, and he fouled out in 47 minutes. So those were big minutes he was playing down the stretch of the season. Maybe 44 isn't that ridiculous of an upside guess.
We're going to have to get a Nick Nurse meme the way we have a Tibbs one, you know?
Will there be a game in this series where Siakam plays all 48 minutes?
No.
Elimination game, I think he does. I think he plays him the entire game. We just got the Raptors starting lineup. No surprises. Fred VanVleet, Gary Trent Jr., OG Anunoby, Scotty Barnes, Pascal Siakam. We have also no starting lineup yet for the 76ers. I thought that might have come through. Let's talk about the pay up options for this slate, because this is going to be, we haven't gotten this question yet, but I guarantee a good old Barkley guarantee that somebody's going to ask us Jokic or Joel Embiid. You know what my answer is. Everybody knows my answer is. I don't even have to say it. What's yours?
I'm with you. It's Jokic. I mean, you can clearly play both guys together. Both guys are egregiously underpriced for the kind of production that they've given us all year. But for me, Jokic is the clear better value. And I will probably, this might be a hot take, but I will probably be underweight in lineups with both of them. Right?
I understand that.
On this slate in particular, right? This 2-game slate. I think that everybody, like the vast majority of people, are going to put both guys in. They're going to go down to those value options. But I think there are some nice mid-range plays here that you can use to fill in a team if you only go with one of those 2 studs. I mean, right now we're projecting Draymond for the most ownership at 6,100, but OG Anunoby at 5,500, I think is excellent. Tobias at 67 or Maxey at 64, I think are strong. Klay Thompson at 78, Fred VanVleet at 79. I think that there are paths where if all the value guys disappoint, getting 6x value from some of these more mid-range players ends up being the optimal lineup construction.
I understand the logic. Here's where I'm going to disagree, though. The price on DraftKings is so egregious on Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic that it's just hard for me to not see these guys being optimal, at least one of them. Jokic at 10.6, Embiid at 10.4. Who the hell came up with these salaries? What is the pricing algorithm doing? It makes zero sense. This is what's worse pricing: Nikola Jokic at 10,600 or Michael Lorenzen at 7,000 yesterday.
I mean, in baseball, anything can happen. So Joel Embiid is clearly the worst, and Nikola Jokic is the worst. And for the record, there's 0 lineups where I will have neither. I think you need to have one, if not both. I just will be underweight on lineups where I have both of them combined, because again, I think that's going to be a super chalky lineup construction.
Yeah, it's hard for me like I'm over in the build I have. I'm overweight to both Jokic and Embiid. It was the same case for me on the main slate. The pricing it's bad. It's not correct. But I think something else we should consider while we're here is, where does James Harden fit in the mix for you relative to those top two guys? Because while the price isn't any good on Embiid and Jokic, it's not like a 9,200 salary on Embiid, on James Harden is all that better from just a points per dollar perspective. So I have a lot less exposure to Harden than I do to Jokic and Embiid. Do you think that's correct?
Yes. James Harden I've been fighting the urge to say James Harden is cooked, but he really might be cooked. Like he is he's had a terrible season from an efficiency standpoint. He got off to a really nice start when he joined the 76ers. They won their first 5 or 6 games. Harden was shooting the ball better, but down the stretch, his efficiency numbers tanked again. He was career worst in virtually every shooting metric this season. With Philly, he was 40% from the field, 32.6% from 3-point range, an effective field goal percentage of just about 48%. He's never been that low. So I think that when you look at these price tags, his is not nearly as egregious to me as Jokic's or Embiid's.
Yeah, and there was a point where I think it was either his first 2 or 3 games with Philly, he looked really good. And there was a part of me when he was with the Nets, I couldn't tell. Was he on the decline? Did he not give a shit? Was he out of shape? Like, there was a lot of things that were going through my head, and I just didn't really know. And then he came to Philly and just immediately started crushing. I was like, all right, they got the peak version of Harden, and he was just kind of checked out when he was in Brooklyn. But then he kind of started to tail off. And I know people are bringing up this hamstring injury. It's been a year now. Is the hamstring issue? I don't think the hamstring issue is real. I kind of think it's just something they're throwing out there. And by the way, if the hamstring is still bothering him, maybe it's just an age thing at this point. Maybe it's just his legs don't work as well as they used to. So I don't know what to expect from Harden in the playoffs right here. Like I said, I'm a lot lower on him than I am on Jokic or I am on Embiid. It's still worth getting some exposure to him if you're playing a bunch of lineups because he's 9,200. But if you're only playing one lineup, I think you have to prioritize Embiid and Jokic before you get to James Harden. FanDuel, for whatever reason, has been giving him small forward eligibility for a long time. Cool. That makes him viable at another spot. It makes no sense, but it is what it is. But
I'd rather have Siakam at 8,900. And unfortunately, the positions aren't as friendly for him, right? It seems like all the best plays today are either at center or power forward. But I think Siakam at 8,900 is a better price tag than Harden at 92. I mean, we've talked about just the volume of minutes that this guy is expected to play today, and he's averaged 1.31 DraftKings points per minute over the past month. That's better than Harden over that stretch. So I am projecting Siakam for roughly the same amount of points, if not a couple extra, and he is cheaper. So,
by the way, you are right. I am wrong. You're smart. I'm not. You're handsome. I'm not. Starting lineup for the Philadelphia 76ers. It is Danny Green starting, Matisse Thybulle coming off the bench.
I got one.
You got one. There you go. So that I do wonder. I wonder if the inverse is happening versus what I said now also, where I thought that Thybulle, with this being a home game where he's able to play and not being on the road, I thought that, hey, maybe they'll try to extend Thybulle to play extra minutes. Now that they're starting Danny Green, I'm thinking maybe they're thinking, hey, we're not going to be able to play Thybulle on the road. Maybe we don't play him quite as much in this series just because if we can't play him on the road, we don't want it to be a thing that totally screws up team chemistry. I have to be a lot lower on Matisse Thybulle now. Not that I love getting to Danny Green, but I prefer Danny Green to Matisse Thybulle. Now that we've gotten that starting lineup, I assume that nothing's changed for you. You still prefer Danny Green to Thybulle.
Yes, sir. North Babylon in the building. Long Island, represent.
Yep. So I'm going to have to change some of my main slate lineups now to reduce some of my exposure to Matisse Thybulle. But that aside, does this change anything else for you when it comes to the 76ers?
Not really. I think it's good for the flow of the game, right? I mean, I think that when you look at the Philadelphia offense, I would expect them to be more efficient with Danny Green on the floor than Matisse Thybulle. It's going to give Joel Embiid a bit more space. It's going to open up the lane a little bit more for James Harden. So, and it's not like it's a huge usage differential, right? Danny Green's just going to stand in the corner and he might shoot it when you pass it to him occasionally. That's basically what he's going to do. So I think it's a slight positive for the rest of the 76ers starters. And it's probably a positive for the Raptors as well, since it's less minutes where Matisse Thybulle is going to be on the floor defensively.
Yeah, and I think now you and I, we're going to have a gripe with somebody in YouTube chat a little bit, because Rob Henn is saying that James Harden has never been efficient and that we should only judge him based on what he does for the playoffs right here. Well, we have to make our lineups before
an egregious
a couple of things. First of all, James Harden has been one of the most efficient guards in the NBA for like 10 years now. It's been for a very long, until this year, he's been one of the most efficient guards in the league. That aside, we kind of have to judge his performance in the last couple of months to get an idea of who he is now. And I really don't know. I think there's a really wide range of outcomes here with Harden, because I don't know if he's on the decline. I don't know if it's a thing where just the regular season doesn't matter as much to him. There's a lot of narratives at play that I think are kind of noise, but at the same time, they matter, but I'm not going to know how it matters until after the games have been played. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of have to take your stand. And I think that James Harden clearly has proven to not be one of these guys who lives in the gym. You know what I'm saying? You wouldn't with me shooting in the gym. He's somebody who enjoys his free time, his spare time, and he's not a young pup anymore. He's 32 years old. So to expect some decline from him with that in mind, I think is kind of reasonable.
Well, the law has been laid down, it looks like, because we've got Pete Viles, bro. He is saying in the YouTube chat that James Harden is washed and he sucks. Well, Pete could be right. He could be. He's certainly been better at DFS than I have been this year. Pete's been killing it, especially on these small slates. There's not too many people that have been better on the small slates than a Hobro if you look at the top of the standings, but could be. If and by the way, washed is relative, right? Like, because washed for Harden is still a low-level all-star player. But washed doesn't mean that he's now what Russell Westbrook is. It just means he's no longer an MVP candidate player, right? Is that kind of where you're at with him?
Yes.
We have one other question when it comes to kind of minutes and injuries that I think is pretty hard to parse. What's your expectation for playing time for Steph Curry? It's been over a month since he played, and this is a foot injury, foot/ankle. So it's a lower body injury. This isn't the same as, when somebody like Paul George was coming back from his elbow injury and played a whole bunch of minutes. This is Steph Curry coming back from a lower body injury, which, number one, maybe he's not totally 100% healthy because we haven't seen him play for a while. But then number two, also, I don't know what his conditioning is, especially for a guy who is, so his success is so predicated on movement and his quickness. What is your playing time expectation for him? Because he's another guy who you could tell me that Steph Curry plays 32 minutes, and I wouldn't be surprised he could play 28. I wouldn't be surprised he could play. I know the team has said that they're going to lightly limit his minutes, but it's a playoff game. If he's playing well and feels good, maybe he plays more than that. But how are you handling Curry? Because he's somebody that I'm not really getting to at all today.
Yeah, I think the quote from Kerr was he's not going to play 30 to 35 minutes. So I think putting him into that 28 to 30 range is where he should be projected, right? I think that's his median outcome today. And I personally think that that's enough for the Warriors in this first round series versus Denver. I think the Warriors, first, I think people have forgotten how good the Warriors are when they have Steph Curry and Draymond Green on the floor. And there's been a lot of people that I've seen that have been picking the Nuggets, and I just do not see that at all. I think the Warriors win the series in 5 games. I think that starts in game 1, even if Curry only plays 30 minutes. So I don't think there's going to be a huge incentive for Steve Kerr to push him, because I don't expect the Nuggets to really be that big of a challenge for this team.
I guess it depends how nuclear Jokic goes. In general, I agree. There was a point in time where I thought the Nuggets were very live to win the West, but that was when I thought that Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. are coming back from the playoffs. But the playoffs have started and they're not here, so that's a little bit problematic for the upside of the Denver Nuggets. Also, is there any path for Denver to win this game realistically outside of Jokic just going absolutely bonkers?
Jeff Green.
Probably not that either.
I mean, it's been Jokic. It's been Jokic all year, and he's had some crazy playoff series in the past. I don't know how much higher his ceiling can possibly be in the playoffs than it was during the regular season. I mean, he already did everything for this team. So for me, the question is just where is his help coming from? Because if anybody steps up, they could be a value in at their current salaries, right? I mean, Aaron Gordon to me is too expensive at 6,500 on DraftKings, but then Will Barton at 58, I think that's kind of fair. Like Monty Morris is 49, Bones is 51. Like somebody's gonna have to give us some value here, right? Doesn't it feel that way, or is it just? It's just going to be Jokic scoring 90 DraftKings points and everybody else is less than 30.
I think there's a pretty good chance it's going to be Jokic scoring 90 fantasy points. I mean, not that I think that's actually the most likely scenario, but just kind of saying that in terms of who has to be fantasy viable for this team, it could just be Jokic, and that wouldn't really stun me.
Okay.
But how about put it, if you had to roster one of the non-min price guys that isn't Jokic, who would it be? Because, there is Monty Morris, there's Aaron Gordon, we have Will Barton to consider. So if you had to roster somebody from that tier, and let's say Mike Lawrence, our producer, awesome, his life is on the line. You have to pick out which of those guys is going to score the most fantasy points. For whatever reason, you've decided you want to spare Mike and save him. Which guy are you going with?
Who's going to score the most fantasy points, or who's the best play? What's the question? Different question.
Yeah. All right. Let's go with best fantasy play, like on a points per dollar basis.
I would take Monty, but he's going to be the chalkiest of the group. I think Barton is the most intriguing to me at 5,800 because Will Barton is okay, right? He's somebody that we've seen be like a fantasy point per minute type of guy in the past. So I do think he has some upside at 5,800. Bones is the real wild card. He's been at 1.2 DraftKings points per minute over the past month, but he could play 18 minutes today. He could play 25 minutes today. I don't really know what to make of his minutes. So I think that this is a situation that I'm kind of taking like a shotgun approach to. I'm spraying. I'm going to try and hit a little bit of everybody, and I'm going to hope that one of them pops off.
Yeah, so, I mean, I don't think that Mike Malone knows who he's playing of those guys either. I doubt he has any clue what he's doing with the minutes for Bones Highland. And I don't mean that in a like a slanderous way against Mike Malone. I know a lot of people dislike him. I don't think Michael Malone is all that bad of a coach. There's a lot of people that feel differently because his rotations are inconsistent, which is frustrating from a fantasy purpose. But here's how I think that he is going to approach this game. If Bones Highland comes off the bench and starts knocking down shots, he's going to get extended minutes. If Bones Highland comes in and misses a couple of shots and takes bad shots, because he takes a lot of bad shots that are very deep threes that are contested, sometimes they go in, sometimes they don't, he might play 18 minutes today. So I think that Bones Highland, particularly for a 2-game slate, for the main slate, I don't really think there's that much need to get to Bones Highland, but for the 2-gamer, I think that the upside is realistic. And I think that that's what makes him somebody worth getting to. Does that all follow?
Yeah, I like that. And again, he's at 26% projected ownership. So for a 2-game slate, that's pretty reasonable.
Yeah. And let's see somebody's asking a baseball question. I haven't built lineups for the baseball slate yet. I'm going to do it after this, or else I would answer your question, Joseph Ramirez, but I just haven't built those yet. We do have a question. Joe Ducks and Raiders wants us to know who are the best Warriors to play on FanDuel. And this is good that he asked this because this is actually the next part of the Steph Curry conversation I wanted to have with you. If we're expecting that Curry's going to play a few less minutes than he normally would, What does that do for the outlook of Jordan Poole? Because Poole was terrific down the stretch of the year, but clearly a lot of that had to do with Steph Curry not playing. With Curry playing but limited minutes, how does this make Jordan Poole either viable or not viable as a fantasy option?
I think Poole is stupid cheap at 6,300 on FanDuel. Whatever you expect Stephen Curry to play, Jordan Poole is going to get all the minutes that he is not on the floor, plus they'll share the court for a solid handful, right? Like, I think Poole has vaulted himself into the to the point where he is a must-play roster guy for the Warriors. Like, he is going to get 32 plus minutes in these playoff games, regardless of who's healthy, who's available. He's been that good. Will his per minute efficiency decrease while he's sharing the court with Steph? Yes, it has to. But I still think there's enough minutes for him where Steph is going to be off the court, where Poole can sort of get the chance to run the show. So at 6,300, I think he's one of the best guard plays on this slate. On DraftKings, where he is over 8K, much riskier there, right? It's much harder to get any exposure to him there. But on FanDuel in particular, I love him at 6,300. I also really like Clay at 68, and I love Draymond at 64. So I think the Warriors on FanDuel are probably my favorite team to target in this matchup.
I think from the same vein that we just talked about the playing time of Steph Curry, what are you expecting for playing time for Draymond Green then? Because Draymond's also somebody who struggled with his health in the second half of the year, and we haven't seen that many games where he's played extended minutes. Obviously, different situation with it being the playoffs, but I'll read off some of Draymond Green's recent box scores. And against the Pelicans, 25 minutes. Game before that, 32, 26, 24, 33, 32, 26, 24, 29, 18. So in the second half of the season, he only played more than 30 minutes 3 times. And of those times, the most he played was 33. What's a realistic expectation for playing time for Draymond?
I haven't projected for 34. Maybe that's a smidge aggressive, but if you're not going to play him in the playoffs, like, what's the point of, like, what are we doing anymore? Right? We can't save guys during the postseason. And again, the metrics with the Warriors, with Draymond on the floor, and especially with Draymond and Steph on the floor, they have outscored teams by like 13 points per 100 possessions. Remember, when both of those guys were healthy at the start of the year, they were 18-2. So I think the Warriors are being slept on big time. I think Draymond is a big part of the reason why they're going to be successful in the postseason. And yes, I think maybe in game 1, his minutes are a little bit lighter and they'll ramp him up as the series progresses, but there's no reason to expect Draymond's minutes to not get higher here during the postseason.
Yeah, I think higher is a very reasonable expectation. I'm just a little
yeah.
I'm a little unsure how much
like that
higher.
Hot take? Higher. That's my answer.
Higher. There we go. So, speaking of, I can't find it. Somebody had a hot take in the YouTube chat that I wanted to read, but we do have some more Harden takes here. We do have a super chat, Rob Hen following up. Also, Obi-Wan saying Harden shooting in the strip joints. Who is he? Plaxico Burress? I mean, like Harden, whatever his off-court activities are. I think people overblow it in terms of what his performance is on the court. Nobody's is like 24 hours a day committed to their job, right? When I'm not on a stream, I'm not just sitting here preparing for shows. I'm also, hanging out with friends, doing whatever. Yeah, exactly. So like the stuff with James Harden and what he does off the basketball court, no player is just shooting balls in the gym 24 hours a day. It's a little bit overblown. I don't think it impacts him that much. But anyway, Rob Hen left us a super chat. Call out my iffy take like that, LOL. Hey, if you say that James Harden was inefficient in his prime, there's no way I'm not going to call that out. Oh, but I didn't realize Rob Hen is saying that he feels like Harden is one of the best plays on the slate. Okay. See, I thought he was anti-James Harden. Yeah, I mean, the upside is there for him. I prefer to pay up for Jokic and Embiid. That's where I prefer to spend my salary, with Jokic being my number one guy. That's almost always where, by the way, what is, I don't know. So somebody's upset. Mike, what is this guy upset about in the YouTube chat? I'm struggling to follow it. Yeah. Well, you also your audio is cutting out there, so I'm not really that much clear on what the issue is. But whatever issue he has, email support, and we should be able to help you if there's been some issue with the sign up promo code. We also have a lot of them going on, like Prize Pick sponsors this show. If you sign up for the first time, you get up to $100 bonus on your first deposit, and you also get 1 free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. But the stuff, it's not automated. It's not like a thing that you sign up, you automatically get it. It's something they have to send us, the sign-up emails, then we have to cross-reference it and get people access. So email support at awesemo.com, and if you signed up, they'll be able to help you. It's one of those things that is, it just doesn't always happen immediately, but we'll get you taken care of if you email support. All right, let's move.
And if that doesn't work, get in Greg's DMs. He loves that.
Yeah, I actually do. I like but I do a lot of... Totally honest. If you guys have any questions about anything, DM me on Twitter. I usually answer all of them. If I don't, it's just because I missed it. But I try to answer all of my DMs whenever I can.
You're a very helpful man. You know, I was thinking that I was going to make your life inconvenient, and you just welcomed it.
No. I'm sure that the majority of people that are in YouTube chat, if they follow, there's probably a good chance that they've DM'd me at some point in time and I've answered them. So I've no issues with it at all. I'm not like, so there's other, like, if you try to DM Josh Engelman or Adam Scher for it, like, you never hear back from them. There's zero chance, but I'll answer. I promise I'll answer your DMs if I see it and you guys message me. Did we get all of the super chats? All right, cool. So we've got everything answered here. Did you build any lineups for Showdown by chance?
No.
All right, I'm going to
do it on a little bit of the fly.
Yeah, I think let's try to figure out some of the top captain plays for the game that's about to come up, the Toronto Philly game. Or actually, let's do it for the late night game because that is bigger prize pools. So we could hit on that in the final few minutes.
I'm playing almost exclusively Jokic at captain if I were to be playing this contest. I did a little bit of research on the Showdown format for an article, and Stars and Scrubs is almost always the best build. Yeah. You're sacrificing too many points if you're not getting someone in the captain spot that has the potential to just put up a lot of raw points, right? And when you look at Jokic on this slate, if he goes out and he puts up 60 plus, it's just a wrap, right? Nobody else. If you're taking Steph Curry off the board, we're limiting Jordan Poole's upside now that Curry is back. Like, nobody can match him. So I think, depending on how aggressive you want to play it, I wouldn't be opposed to just going 100% Nikola Jokic in the captain spot.
Yeah, and so I'm running a crunch of lineups right now. I'll follow up with what comes out on that in a second, but also let's sweat these games a little bit and talk about what's going on, because already I see people freaking out about what's going on with Jaren Jackson Jr. This might shock you. Are you sitting down, Matt?
Yes.
He got into foul trouble.
Oh my goodness.
Can you believe it? I've never seen anything like this before.
I am looking at the stats right now though, and it's just a classic Triple J line. He's got 7 blocks, Greg.
Yeah, it's the most absurd line ever. So Jaren Jackson Jr. has played 16 minutes because of foul trouble, and he has 7 blocks in 16 minutes. A block every 2.5 minutes is absolutely ridiculous. So he's having, particularly for FanDuel, he's having a really good fantasy game. This is the most bizarre way I've ever seen.
It looks like he also just picked up his 5th foul.
Good for him. Will he? Oh, well, he's already. Will he finish with more rebounds or personal fouls? Right now, he's
I'm going to give him the edge 4 rebounds. I think he can only get one more foul, right? He can only get one more foul. So I'll get him to 7 boards. Sure. Why not?
I'm going to take the personal fouls. No offense. I love Triple J. I played a lot of him on FanDuel, and I'm happy with the results, even though he's only played 16 minutes. But it does seem like this is another foul trouble game for Triple J here. By the way, other lines in this game: Dylan Brooks, 22 points, 1 rebound, no other stats. So a little bit of a weird stat line for him, but he was so cheap on FanDuel. It looks like he's playing pretty well relative to his price. Ja Morant, 25 points, 4 rebounds, 7 assists, and a steal. So pretty good line for him. We've got Ant Edwards, 31 points, 4 assists, a steal, and a block. So massive game there.
Nice value performance for Clark, too, for the Grizzlies.
Oh, yeah, true. So Brandon Clark, the main beneficiary, because not only is Triple J in foul trouble, Steven Adams as well. So they're only getting 20 minutes out of Adams, 16 out of Triple J. So as a result, we got Brandon Clark, 9.7 rebounds, 2 assists off the bench. So he's working himself to a possible chance to be an optimal lineup today. The other bench players for the Grizzlies, less so with their kind of production they have. So and Cat, how many fantasy points did Cat have at halftime? He had like 30.
I had about 30 at the half.
Okay, so he's still done some damage so far in the second half. But it looks like Edwards the most necessary play in this game. Fair to say.
Yeah, the salary was pretty good on him. The one thing is the peripherals haven't really been there, but he has scored the ball very efficiently. So I still think he needs a big fourth quarter to kind of lock himself into the optimal lineup.
He's at 44 fantasy points on DK right now. And on FanDuel, he's at 43 at 7,900. I feel pretty good that he's going to be optimal. Another one, too, Patrick Beverley putting up kind of normal Patrick Beverley game. He has 7.6 rebounds, 4 assists, 7 points, 6 assists, 4 rebounds, and a block on FanDuel. So at his 5K price tag, looks like he has a pretty good chance of returning good value as well. Let's see. Oh, did Triple J foul out? I have the UFC on my screen here. I don't have the NBA game, but somebody just said he fouled out. Is that true?
I have not seen that, but I don't have the game on either. I'm just looking at the game cast right now.
Yeah, no, it looks like 5 personal fouls on Triple J and he came out. So no foul out. He still has 1 foul left, but that's going to be a good sweat. Personal fouls versus rebounds. I'm kind of curious. YouTube chat. What is your guys' guess? Who is going to have, what is he going to finish with? More rebounds or more fouls than Jaren Jackson Jr.? Let's make the sweat real. By the way, I have my Showdown lineups run. By far, Nikola Jokic comes up the most in the captain spot. Like, not even close for me in terms of what ends up being optimal. It is Jokic all day. Let me see what our ownership projections are for Showdown tonight, if we have them up right now. And then I could compare some of the stuff I was getting to that, and then we could make some conclusions about best plays. Yep, we've got it up. So Jokic is projected for 91% ownership overall, 50% of it coming in the captain spot. Relative to that 50% ownership number, would you rather be above or below that in large field tournaments on Jokic?
Well above.
So in the crunch I ran, I came above it, but not well above, only slightly above it. If you're trying to get different now, who is the guy that you think has the most upside that is picking up lesser ownership? So there's only 3 guys that are picking up like any real legitimate, like heavy amounts of exposure, we'll call it, in the captain spot. We got Jokic at 50%, 10.5% for Draymond Green, 9.5% for Klay Thompson. Everybody else is pretty contrarian. So if you're taking one of the contrarian captains, who would be the guy for you?
I would probably go with Jordan Poole in that case. Not that I don't like Jordan Poole's price tag, but again, I'm really kind of limiting my captain exposure to guys that I think have legitimately high ceilings. And I would rank them Jokic 1, Draymond 2, Klay 3. So if I'm taking those 3 guys off the board, the next tier down for me is Jordan Poole and Will Barton, guys like that. And I just think that Poole still has the upside for the best game out of that next year.
Let's see. What is it going to be for? I'm going to go with Steph Curry. So I don't know what those minutes are going to look like exactly. We've both agreed we think the most likely scenario is that they limit. But what if the game's competitive, Curry feels good, and he's just shooting the lights out? Are they really going to limit Steph Curry to 28 minutes?
Steve in that Kerr scenario, is,
a competitive playoff game where he feels good. Like I think Steph Curry at 5%. It's a showdown contest. It's a 1-game slate. We're trying to differentiate. Yeah, that's where I would go. People aren't rostering Steph Curry. The crunch I did, I ended up with 10% of Curry at the captain spot, which is double his 5% projected ownership. obviously there's a lot of variance, but I kind of think that's what we're looking for. Yeah, and also, if we look back on this in hindsight and Steph Curry goes, like 8 of 12 from 3, scores 50 real life points, everybody's going to feel like an idiot for not playing Steph Curry more in a showdown slate.
No, you're right. I mean, I just said Jordan Poole at 9-2. So Steph Curry at 10-2 would make me feel very stupid if he goes off.
Yeah, you get Steph Curry for $1,000 more than Jordan Poole, and they have the same ownership.
All right, you've convinced me. I changed my pick.
Yeah, so that's where I'm landing. We got some people in the YouTube chat asking us about Danny Green. So once again, Danny Green starting, Matisse Thybulle coming off the bench. I think it makes neither of them all that appealing for the main slate.
I like Danny Green.
Yeah, for it, I have a slight preference towards Danny Green, but not somebody that I'm like, oh my God, I need to play a whole bunch of Danny Green. I got him into a few lineups, not a super high priority play or anything. By the way, it seems like the foul's a little more popular as the answer in the YouTube chat than is the rebounds. We got some people saying rebounds, but for the most part, that's not where people are going. Current results of the game: the Timberwolves holding a 3-point lead with 10 minutes left. Who do you think ends up winning, Memphis or Minnesota?
I think the Timberwolves are going to give the Grizzlies all that they can handle in this series. I think that they're a tough matchup for the Grizzlies. I'm going to have the Timberwolves stealing game 1 on the road, and Patrick Beverley drinking 17 Bud Lights in his post-game press conference.
If we get the Grizzlies just to get their ass kicked in this series, I just want to fire off hot takes to troll people on Twitter. Because even in this game, dude, it's the on-off court numbers with John Morant for this team make zero sense.
I have been annoying people about John Morant's on-off numbers all season. All season, Greg.
Same thing today. They're down 3, game 1 of the playoffs, and they're getting outscored by 9 points with Morant off the court. For whatever reason, every game this team plays, they're better in the minutes that Morant isn't on the court, and it's always hilarious.
Makes no sense, but
it's just the way it's been going, guys. Thank you very much for watching, but it's time to end because we have the MLB Live Before Lock show coming up next. Do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, check out our sponsor Prize Picks. If you're signing up for the first time, use the promo code Awesemo. Get up to $100 bonus on your first deposit. Also get yourself 1 free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. Good luck tonight.
You wasn't with me shooting in the gym.